I know I don't usually make videos like this, considering the fact that I don't usually watch a lot of anime movies when it comes to reviewing them, but at the same time, considering the fact that looking at Toy Story 4, which is after the events of Toy Story 3 that came out earlier this decade, I feel like making this video is probably my discussion about Pixar movies in the 2010s, since that it's probably one of the only decades where Pixar is probably going to be in a situation involving sequels and the movies in general. Now, before you ask, yes, I am a fan of watching almost all the Pixar movies. From Toy Story, Finding Nemo, Incredibles, and all those other fascinating ideas like Inside Out. It's probably one of the most successful companies ever, considering the fact that they're the ones who made CGI animated movies a thing. I mean, if you look at some of the information about CGI only used for action stuff and completely getting done to death, then you can say that Toy Story was the one that saved everything. Because you know that for an entire movie made out of CGI, you can't argue that it's completely boring. It's really original, since that Toy Story was one of the first CGI movies ever to be premiered in theaters during that time. Even if during that time, well, 2D animation, which is from Disney and soon to be DreamWorks, it was still going strong, but in the 2000s, 2D animation is completely dead. I will go more on that, but that's for a different story. So anyway, now I just noticed this. When I usually think of Pixar movies, I usually think of something that they could do something very original. Like when they can easily do something that no one has ever done before. For example, when they start to begin doing CGI movies, they try to do some experiments. Monsters Inc., Sally's Fall, Finding Nemo, Underwater Fishes, which is probably something that is so difficult to make when they were making the movie in 2003. Really impressive indeed. And it's mainly the fact that they put a lot of attention into detail on some of the surroundings that they do, like the food in Ratatouille. I really think that seeing Pixar doing these kinds of experiments and make these movies into probably one of the best movies of all time really shows onto why almost all the movies have Academy Award winnings of Best Animated Feature of the Year. But let's talk about in the late 1990s. Now, there were only 3 movies that Pixar made during that time. The first was Toy Story, because, you know, it's the first film. The second was A Bug's Life, which is also I did a review on almost a year ago. And the next one was Toy Story 2, which was released in 1999. Now, why am I mentioning these 3 movies? Because these 3 movies all came out in the 1990s. In my opinion, Pixar was just trying to build himself up. While the first movie, which was Toy Story, they need to show off of what they can do for being the first people in doing a CGI movie. A Bug's Life, trying to take it from a new perspective. And as for Toy Story 2, continued the story without whipping itself off. In my opinion, Pixar really tries their best to be very original as possible. And then when the 2000s came, they have gradually improved so much. And what I mean by that is that they completely did so many original and completely perfect movies like Monsters Inc. and Finding Nemo. Sure, there's no such thing as a perfect movie, but when it comes to being original, like figuring out the original score and the situations of the characters are getting themselves into, then I really think that movies like Monsters Inc. really fit in that category. Now, I'm just going to say this right now. I know people don't notice this, but in the 2010s, Pixar has been releasing so many sequels. And guess how many sequels that they released in the 2000s? 0. Yep. There were 0 sequels that Pixar made in the 2000s, which is actually kind of surprising when I completely knows about it. Almost all the movies that they made were either something very original with a different concept from different writers. And I really think that seeing stuff like Ratatouille without something like a sequel is probably something that people really didn't expect. I think that the 2000s were probably mostly the golden age of Pixar, since they had so many original ideas. I mean, the only movie that didn't really work for them was Cars, but in my opinion, it's a so bad it's good kind of movie for me. And besides, I think that movie is probably better than any of the other Cars movies in the franchise. But I'll get to the sequels later. But what I'm saying here is that movies like WALL-E and The Good and Up really shows that they can do original ideas, and most of them were released in the same decade. And it's actually kind of impressive to see Pixar doing some original work in the 2000s. But then came the 2010s. Well, Pixar decided to make so much sequels. There was like 1, 2, probably 6 or 7 sequels in this year, if I'm correct. It's actually kind of weird to see so many sequels with only 4 original movies from Pixar that aren't sequels. Now, the first was Toy Story 3, and to be honest, Toy Story 3 was it was a sequel that people really wanted to see after Toy Story 2 came out. And this came out 11 years after Toy Story 2 came out. I really think that with the wait, with everyone grown up, even if I was 12 years old when this came out, I really enjoy this. It's probably a good idea to have a returning cast like Woody, Buzz, and the other characters return in the big screen after 11 long years. But after that, we get into, well, the sequels that are mostly a mix. And the worst Pixar movie from them is Cars 2. And this came out in 2011. A movie, well, it doesn't really have a purpose to exist. And I really didn't feel like wasting my time watching this entire movie because it really didn't feel like it was an actual Cars sequel. This was the first sequel for this decade that it really goes to show that making a sequel isn't really a good idea from Pixar. But even if this sequel is completely different than the first one, it still doesn't give an excuse for being its own thing, because Mato being the main character and involving spies is just hammering in and just completely pushing at the fact that this is ignoring the fact that characters like Lightning McQueen are completely in a race and trying to win the cup trophy or something. But this movie about spies after the last movie, I'm not gonna say that the last movie was good or anything, and there were some people who actually enjoy Cars, but the sequel, it didn't continue anything. It didn't even follow any of the characters' relationships. It's just something that I think that they literally had to make because of toys. At least when other companies like My Little Pony did, they at least put some effort, even if they don't make movies. But here, when they release a movie that is based off of toys, you know that the sequels like this just won't, they just won't have the excuse to exist. It's just really difficult for me to find a reason for this movie to watch because of toys. I just don't. Anyway, so now the next movie that they made was Brave, which wasn't really much of a good movie, and it's kind of a mixed opinion based movie considering the fact that they were hyping this up in the trailers, but not much was, there was not a lot to expect when the movie came out. I mean, it really wasn't that good. It was actually kind of shocking that this won animated feature in 2012. Now this is the first movie that Pixar made that wasn't a sequel since 3 years after Up was in theaters. And after that comes Monsters University, which is not a sequel but a prequel that is. And people will usually expected a sequel to Monsters Inc. because of the ending of Monsters Inc. I'm not going to spoil it, but if you want to know what I'm talking about, then go check the ending right now. My point is that Monsters University, even if I like the movie, I just feel like it's only exists to see returning characters, but for the wrong reasons. See, I just thought that this was going to be a sequel, but a prequel, well, it isn't as, overdone as the sequels. I still think that a prequel involving Monsters Inc. just really doesn't work. I mean, the fact that the movie is mainly focusing on Mike Wazowski. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the picture. There it is. Sorry. And not the continuation of Boo and Sally, kind of takes away the experience. But I think that's probably the best part about Monsters University. They wanted to have some other characters like Mike Wazowski, who has been a comic relief in the first movie, and decided to have its own movie. And I can really understand that the movie is just trying way too hard to make itself really dramatic when it comes to Mike trying to be like Sally in the other game, but apparently with the state that he's in, he's not going to be able to be in the footsteps. But I will say that this prequel, despite being, there, it's still a good way to see other characters return, and the fact that we get to see new things involving the monsters, and the animation is still good. I'm not going to mention about the animation because you know that Pixar never disappoints us in animation. Now, it's been about 2 years since there wasn't a Pixar movie, maybe because Pixar was completely absent in 2014, but when 2015 came, there were 2 movies, Inside Out and The Good Dinosaur. Now, Inside Out was one of my favorite movies because of how really original, and not really original, but the fact that we get to see emotions inside of a brain controlling the mind of a person who's having really hard feelings about her life when it comes to moving to a different location while also missing her friends, and also forgetting some most important stuff about her childhood. Now, I really think that movies like this and Up really shows that Pixar can easily do original ideas. But then came The Good Dinosaur, which is probably the turning point of Pixar's originality. I didn't watch this movie, but I did hope that it wasn't really that good, and it wasn't really much successful. I mean, the concept is really good, considering the fact that Pixar didn't do a movie about dinosaurs. But I think that for what they did in this movie and what they tried to do, it really doesn't work out, considering the fact that it didn't do a lot in the box office, kind of like Inside Out did. And it's actually kind of sad to see The Good Dinosaur in a predicament. Well, it does have some kind of a fan base, but when it comes to watching this movie alone, it's really something that I don't think that Pixar is really good at making. I don't think that's really something that Pixar can do as an original movie. I mean, they can do other original movies, but when it comes to movies like this, it just doesn't. So that's what I think about Pixar's Inside Out and The Good Dinosaur. I mean, they did a good idea with Inside Out, but with The Good Dinosaur that came out later in 2015, it's actually kind of weird to see something like Pixar get a very a completely huge backstep after everything that they did in Inside Out. I mean, The Good Dinosaur wasn't terrible, but it was a disappointment. And after that, apparently there was still more sequels. Apparently, the more I see these movies, like Finding Dory and Cars 3, I think that completely seeing sequels like Finding Dory, I think that seeing stuff like this really shows that Pixar doesn't really have much original ideas. And keep in mind, when Finding Dory came out, Pixar was about, well, not really 21 years old, but about 21 years old when they've been premiering the movies in theaters, and they'll probably want to have ideas for that to find other ways to make sequels. Now, I will admit that Finding Dory is a really great movie, even if it doesn't surpass the first movie. The animation is obviously a big improvement considering the fact that this came out 13 years after the last movie. The story was actually kind of unique to see Dory in a situation involving finding her parents, and I really think that most of the comedy in this is kind of like the same in the first movie from mainly Dory. So I really think that this sequel really works out for what they can do for sequels and completely premiering their movies in theaters. Now, as for the next movie, which is Cars 3, well, I think that this shouldn't have been what Cars 2 is all along. Like, this is supposed to be what Cars 2 is supposed to be. Granted, it's basically the same thing that Lightning is supposed to do in the first movie, like winning races, but in this movie, it's probably a good step up considering the fact that this isn't about spies anymore, it's about racing to the finish. I really kind of like that concept since they completely did that in the first movie, and it's kind of good that they're doing that in the third movie. So, seeing Cars 3, I didn't watch Cars 3, but if you think that Cars 2 is one of the most disappointments that Pixar has ever made, then maybe Cars 3 might fix that. Sure, it isn't a great sequel and something that no one asked for, and it's actually kind of shocking to believe that Cars is the second franchise that got 3 movies. But at least they tried to make this up after what they did in the second movie. Now, before I get into Incredibles 2, there was another movie that I sadly didn't watch, and that is Coco, which is probably the next original movie that Pixar made in this decade. However, the biggest problem with that is that this is the 4th movie that Pixar made that wasn't the sequel. The first was Inside Out, the second was The Good Dinosaur. The first was Brave, the second was Inside Out, the second was The Good Dinosaur, and the 4th was Coco. Just by seeing these movies just in the crowd of sequels that Pixar made, it's kind of weird if you ask me. I just think that they probably didn't know what to do next for the original ideals, and they decided to do an ideal, well, the character is going to a Mexican-style city where they try to save the other world or something. I'm sorry, I just didn't see this movie, and I don't have the interest into watching movies like this. I just don't have the time, I'm just saying. But my point is that Coco was a really good movie for what Pixar really had. And when I say stuff like that, I mean the critics who completely watched this movie. I'm sorry, I'm just saying. I'm just proving my point. But since that this is the 4th final movie that they made as an original concept for this decade, I think that at this point this decade is officially, well, Pixar's 2010s is the decade of sequels. Anyway, let's get into The Incredibles 2, which is a movie that I actually saw in theaters. This is probably one of the only franchises where people will die to see a sequel of. Since even if it takes some ideas from the first one, they tried to do something very original by having the villain and doing something like having the heroes going back to doing legal stuff again to save everyone. So this is pretty much the closest thing that we ever get to see something from Pixar that comes to watching a really great sequel from the franchises. The first was and the only time that they did that was Toy Story 3, which was earlier this decade. And Finding Dory was just unnecessary despite being very good. But then we get this. And, since that there's really nothing else that Pixar can do for this year, we get Toy Story 4, which is going to probably follow the events of Toy Story 3, which is supposed to end off this franchise, but we get Toy Story 4. I really think that this isn't going to be as good as the other 3 movies. Not saying that it's going to be a disappointment, but it won't be as one of the greatest movies from those 3 movies. Here's what I mean by that. When they made sequels, they usually had to develop new ideas for the characters and develop new arcs. And I did saw some trailers from Toy Story 4, and it's obviously going to left off of what the other characters did in the last movie, but sorry, I'm taking deep breaths. I just think that seeing these characters again is just kind of weird. I mean, when you get the feel of these characters returning in Toy Story 3, you can feel that because it's been 11 years. And while it's been 9 long years since Toy Story 3, it still feels weird to see these characters come back again. I mean, the effort that they did in Toy Story 3 was so great that you know that they're not going to make a 4th Toy Story movie. The ending was probably one of the best endings that Pixar has ever did. So I just don't understand why they need to make a 4th movie. I mean, I know they can want to see new generations see Toy Story in theaters, but they can just have them being released in theaters in 3D, and they did that before to celebrate the hype of the premiere of Toy Story 3 when they did that in 2009. And the focus of Toy Story 4 will have Bo Peep, which is a character who appeared in the first 2 movies but not in the 3rd movie because of production agreements, since that she could be able to burn alive in the 3rd Toy Story because she's a type of toy that flames can easily burn up so easily. When I heard about this idea, it's not that I hate Bo Peep, but she's just basically the type of character who is just mainly in the background. She's Woody's love interest, but that's about it. And even if she tries to do some nice things, like trying to defend Woody even with his actions in the first movie, and completely respect the fact that Buzz is trying to save his best friend in the second movie, I just don't think why she really needs a return. I mean, in the 3rd movie, she was in bits and pieces of it, but not as a background character, because when Andy got older, she let go of Bo Peep when he really isn't interested into playing with her anymore. So that's why she wasn't in the focus of Toy Story 3, even though there were some other reasons that I discussed earlier. But watching watching some of the screenshots and trailers of the 4th Toy Story film, the animation is obviously a really great improvement. It's actually kind of amazing that the toys look so realistic, to the point that I really found it really amazing that they managed to top themselves again, considering the fact that Toy Story 3 came out earlier this decade. And when I look at Toy Story 3 over this, a lot has changed. I mean, the 2000s upgraded CGI, but the 2010s double that, to the point that seeing these toys look so realistic, but also really cartoonish when it comes to the human designs, I really think that it could be a great way to see some kind of comparison between Toy Story 1, 2, 3, and 4, even if it's really obvious that the first 2 movies came out in the 1990s, where Pixar were at the beginning of the reputation. But if there was ever a chance where I'm able to get all the Toy Story movies, I might do a review on all 4 of them, but that's not the point. My point is that, well, seeing these characters back into theaters again, well, it's good to see a massive improvement of the animation and a return of these characters. I just don't think that a sequel is really needed. I mean, it's either the purpose of having Bo having a really serious role, considering the fact that she really misses Woody, and she wasn't really used a lot in the last movie, but I just really found it weird. I mean, not that she wasn't needed in the last movie, and the fact that she needs to make a return. I just think that she was just completely in a situation where life is just a thing with humans that they don't usually play with toys anymore. So when Andy completely took away Bo Peep because it wasn't interesting to him anymore, I guess that seeing stuff like this is kind of like what Inside Out did well. In the wasting character, they stay gone forever. And they don't ever come back. Even if this isn't the same situation in Toy Story 4, I still think that it's probably a good way to see Bo Peep sent off on a good note, even if she really didn't in Toy Story 3. So I think that what they're going to do in Toy Story 4, it's either having the other characters going to a playground or a festival, what's going to happen, which I saw last week or so, and I really don't know what they're going to do. I mean, in Toy Story 3, you can understand that Annie has grown up, but watching this, for the first time ever, it's really unexpected. I mean, Finding Nemo was understandable considering the fact that it was the first sequel that Finding Nemo had, but this is the third sequel that Pixar has made for Toy Story, and seeing this is just weird. And even if it's good for probably one of the wrong reasons, it still doesn't give it the excuse of not being weird. Even though there are gonna be new characters in this, I just don't understand of what they're going to do next. And we didn't get any new trailer about what the movie is going to be about once it premieres in June. So I just don't understand of what they're going to do. I mean, they're trying to keep this as a secret and completely, really hyped up, but I don't know. I mean, the hype that they did in Toy Story 3 worked, but here, not much. And other than that, this is going to be the final, well, not really the final sequel, but could be the final sequel that Pixar is going to make, because I hope that some of the people in Pixar say that Toy Story 4 will be the final sequel in a while, because, like I mentioned, because Pixar made so many sequels in this decade, it's kind of like Toy Story 3 is the bun, while everything else is just the ingredients of the sandwich, with some original movies being the new ingredients, and the bun at the end of this decade is Toy Story 4, which is actually kind of weird because Toy Story 3 came out earlier this decade, and seeing Toy Story 4 in about 3 or 4 months, it's just weird to see Pixar getting off a high note on this decade that they've been doing. I mean, in 2000s, they have so many original ideas, and while in this decade, they only had four original movies. And I think it really goes to show that Pixar is just running out of ideas when it comes to original movies. I mean, when Toy Story 4 comes out, it will probably be the time where Toy Story 2 is about 20 years old. And they really didn't know what they can do when they can make more movies. I mean, there is some original concepts that they have in the studio right now, but I just think that seeing movies like Toy Story 4, while I am going to watch it in theaters, it's just going to be a really bizarre feeling to see returning characters, even if they already did a great high note at the end of the third movie. I mean, here's my opinion on the Pixar movies that they did for this decade. For the majority of what they had, they probably wanted to listen to their fans in making sequels. Well, except the Cars fans, because, well, after Cars 2, they pretty much knew that they didn't want a Cars 3, but they still made it anyway, even if it was supposed to be a makeup for the second sequel, but for the sequel, which is Cars 2. But when you look at Toy Story 4, along with Finding Dory and Incredibles 2, it just shows to me that Pixar just wants to have some kind of a massive impact on the other franchises that didn't either wanted the sequel or needed a sequel. I mean, I did heard some rumors that there's going to be a Bugs Life 2, but the only thing I can think about it is that the animation is going to be way better considering the fact that this movie came out in 1998, which is about 20 years old. Yeah, 20 years old. This movie was 20 years old. So, with the fact that this movie ended off with all the bugs happily ever after with no consequences, there's really no point into continuing the Bug's life. Same goes to the other movies. I know some people really want to see a sequel to Ratatouille where they can fight off another restaurant, but that's probably really predictable of what the story is going to have. I think that Pixar is just trying to figure out what they can do for original concept for their movies. So I really doubt if they're ever going to make a sequel involving Ratatouille or WALL-E or Up. Because movies like these, when they're standalone, they really don't have a reason to have a continuous story because they never have plans on having sequels. I just think that they're just basically a one-time thing only, just to make it work for Pixar to be very original. And besides, they put a lot of effort into these movies. So you wouldn't need to understand that the effort that they did in these movies is mostly 100% considering the fact that they have everything that they need to make something that isn't a sequel. But since that they're going to probably do more, I just think that seeing stuff like this is just kind of rare to see from Pixar. I'm not saying that Pixar is a really redundant studios, and it's still one of the greatest studios out there, but I just think that for the position that they're in right now, with the release of Toy Story 4, I think that what they're going to do in Toy Story 4 will be a way of showing everyone that they're just basically making sequels because they really don't have a lot. This studio has been making movies for about a long time since now. Now granted, there are some sequels that should have a sequel, like Monsters Inc., like I mentioned before, like they can show the life between Sully and Boo after the events of the first movie, which is actually kind of something that could really work in this situation. And it's kind of probably one of the best possibilities that Pixar can do, even if they made a prequel of it. And as for Inside Out, this is basically the next Toy Story when it comes to making sequels, and also the Incredibles way of making sequels. I just really think that having more about what Riley is going to do with her future and her emotions are getting the best of her, it would probably be really great to see more of Riley's emotions in the situation that what they can do involving when Riley gets older. It's kind of really great to see what they can top in the last movie. I really think that movies like Inside Out can make a really perfect sequel. And as for Incredibles 2, even after it came out, people wanted to see in Incredibles 3. Yeah, you know how diehard these Incredibles fans really want to see more about the Incredibles. But in my opinion, there's really no point to making a sequel, because I think that this sequel exists just for fan service and the fact that they need to fix this whole heroes are illegal thing in the cities that the Incredibles are in. So I think that making a sequel is kind of pointless. Even if the Undermire is still in this situation where he isn't captured or anything, I still think that it really doesn't make a difference, because mostly there's several other villains in The Incredibles, so there's really no surprise that, that they should have a movie of their own. I just think that continuing after Incredibles 2 is kind of pointless. I think doing it once is enough, even if it was a 14-year long time coming to see a sequel. Now, going back to Toy Story 4, like I said, I am going to watch it, and after I'm done watching it in theaters, I might make a review of it and do a spoiler-free review of it, like I did in My Little Pony, the movie, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I just think that seeing stuff like that, I just think that me reviewing spoiler-free movies like Toy Story 3 needs to be reviewed in order to understand what people are getting themselves into once they watch this movie in theaters. Anyway, that's really all to say, and what is the purpose of this? It's basically what Pixar has been doing in the 2010s. For what they did in this year, there were so many sequels that actually worked, but movies like Cars 2 and stuff really didn't. And it really goes to show that Pixar is going to a different direction where they can't find a lot of original ideas because they completely top themselves, and I don't think they're going to be able to top of what they did. That's why I think that Toy Story 3 won't be as good as the last movie, or as the other two movies. But we don't know what's going to happen once we watch the movie in theaters, and I will do a review of it, obviously, once I'm done watching it in theaters. But for what Pixar has in the 2020s, there could be some sequels, but I really got a feeling that they're probably going to stick on making original movies, even if it's going to take a long time to handle. The 2 decades of Pixar involving one with original ideas, while the other with sequels galore, you can tell that they're probably scraping the bottom barrel of what they have, except with Monsters, Inc. and Inside Out. But then again, we don't know what Pixar has in store with us when the next decade comes. I'm Lonely Fanboy Foy here, and I hope you enjoyed this video, because this is my video about what Pixar did in the 2010s.